This is the podcast of INCACT, the European Network on Cultural Management and Policy. In this series, we interview extraordinary professionals from the cultural management and policy community. Join us to hear their stories, the secrets of their success, and their advice for creating innovation by inspiring new policies and practices in the cultural, education, and research sector.
I'm Janelia Cogliandro Payens, INCAT Secretary General, and this podcast is a part of a special series in which we talk with inspiring leaders committed to contribute to the sustainability of arts and cultural sector. This special series of podcasts is registered at the occasion of the INCAT Academy on Sustainable Cultural Management and Policy, organized by INCAT in April 2023 in Santander. These conversations with cultural leaders are meant to inspire the current and future generation in developing a new sustainable practice and policy. Good morning, INCAT community. Today I have the pleasure and the honor to have in our office Claire Buckley. Claire is leading a key project and program for Julie Bicycle, an organization that is considered a leader in inspiring and helping the cultural sector to greening practice and their own project implementation. Claire, I'm very happy to have you today with us, and I will be also extremely curious to ask to present yourself and tell us what are you doing today in the frame of Julie Bicycle.
Thanks, Janelia. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I'll say a few words about myself. I am from Ireland and I have worked in the environmental field for about 25 years. I've worked in different countries in Europe, in Belgium, France, and Austria and Germany in particular. I've worked with different sectors, including public sectors, some big companies. I've worked with the European Commission. And in 2012, I started working with Julie's Bicycle. And it was the first time I had really worked with the arts and culture sector. And for me, it has been such an amazing opportunity to work with this wonderful sector, because I have really seen and understood the amazing role which the arts and culture can play in responding to the climate and ecological crisis. It has so much to bring. It has creativity, it has innovation, it has the ability to reach people's hearts and minds. And this is incredibly important, because we know and we see that despite knowing for such a long time what is happening in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of environmental pollution, in terms of biodiversity loss, we have the science, we have some investment, we have technology, but we know this is not enough to make the kind of changes that we need to make. We need a cultural change and a change in our values. And this is why the creative, the cultural, and the arts community has such an amazing role to play, because what we need is culture change to be really able to respond to the challenges that we face, and also to create a more positive future. So yeah, I've been working with Julie's Bicycle since 2012, and I work with different organizations supporting individual change, and also working on a policy level, and working with sector approaches and groups of cultural and arts organizations. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful sector to work with.
Thank you, Claire, and I absolutely agree with you that the cultural sector is part of the response, a key actor in the response to this climate fight. You have a really an impressive career and experience. So you are the right person to ask what are the change that you have seen over the past year in relation to the sector response to the ecological and climate crisis. Could you please tell us more about this?
Yes, absolutely. I think, sometimes when we are working in the environmental fields, it can feel a bit overwhelming and there is a lot of negative news. But what I can say, working with the arts and culture sector over the last 10 years, is that there has been so much positive change. And we are in a very, very different place now than we were 10 years ago, for example. What has changed? I think there are a few key things. And I think the first thing is that we've seen a shift within the sector from focusing on reducing negative impacts to looking at bigger changes and system changes, in looking at the organizations and the sector as a whole and what it can do to really address the climate and ecological crisis in a holistic way. So this means, yes, reducing your impacts, but absolutely it means putting environmental thinking, values, and action at the heart of what you do as a cultural organization. If it's how you connect your collections to environmental themes, if it's how you're designing your exhibitions to be more environmentally sustainable. So there is this shift from reducing the negatives to looking at what an organization does more holistically and where environment intersects with those issues and with those activities. And what we have seen is a lot of innovation and solutions which are coming from the arts and culture sector, where many organizations are like, we need solutions, we need better materials, we need a circular approach to design. And where they haven't found those solutions, with creativity and imagination, they have been working to develop those solutions themselves. And there are many amazing examples across the sector of that kind of response. So there is bigger change. There is an understanding that, yes, looking at waste and recycling is important, but actually looking at the purpose of an organization and how that can change is really important. So that innovation and that creativity, the sector putting creativity and imagination to its response to climate and environmental issues, that is really exciting. And that is a big change that we've seen over the last few years. I think another key change, which we see more recently, is the understanding that the crisis and the challenges that we face are actually a result of inequality and values, which are about this idea of eternal growth. And that understanding of the inequality and the injustice, which is at the root of the climate and ecological crisis, is really important. And understanding that if we are to address these issues, then we must also address the inequality, which is at the heart of it. And we must understand, in particular, in the global north, in Europe, we are the most privileged, the richest countries and cultural organizations. We may not always feel like that, but we are most responsible for the problems and the inequalities and the pollution which has been created. And we therefore have a greater responsibility to take action on that and to do that in a way which recognizes the injustice and which is inclusive and tries to bring in different voices and different perspectives in the way that we take action. So that understanding of what lies at the heart of the crisis that we're in is really, really important. And that is definitely a change. I think another change, especially over probably the last 2 or 3 years, which is wonderful to see, is a lot of new initiatives which are emerging. So, Julie's Bicycle, we started 16 years ago, and we work across performing arts, visual arts, music, all areas of the sector. And more recently, we've seen some new initiatives emerging. So, for example, we have Music Declares Emergency initiative, which is focused in particular on the live music and recorded music sector. We have groups like the Galleries Climate Coalition, which is very focused, unsurprisingly, on galleries. We have initiatives in the museums and heritage sector, which are looking at really specific things like exhibition design and circularity. And this is different, and this is great to see, because they're really able to get down to the very specific issues for a gallery, for a museum, for a music festival, and to develop collaboration and really sector or art form specific solutions. So this is really, really wonderful to see. I think what's also changing is an understanding of the need for cultural policy to connect with environmental policy and issues. And, we see that the arts and culture sector is really doing an awful lot of good work already. And what they need now is for cultural policy and funding to help to unlock that, to accelerate that. And we do some very interesting work with on cultural policy on the international level, on the national level, on the city level, on what cultural policy and funding can do to support and to facilitate and to drive environmental action within the arts and culture sector. And I think probably the final thing that I would say in terms of what has changed within the sector is collaboration. There is so much more collaboration now across the sector, between the arts and culture sector and other, the environmental sector, local authorities, different environmental organizations. We can see that collaboration happening increasingly. And this is really important, because we can only find the solutions we need by working together. And I think what's also interesting is that, this idea of competition, of not sharing what you're doing or what solutions you have found, this has really changed. Environmental action is a wonderful, wonderful way of building collaboration and getting past that, competitive attitude. And I think seeing that collaboration emerging and developing is really exciting. So a lot of really, really positive change, and we are in a much better place now in terms of how the sector is thinking about this and responding to this.
Claire, thank you so much. Listening to you, I recognize indeed this appetite to learn as an organization or individual, be part of the solution, but also this climate justice, global south, global north perspective in climate change, or the need for cultural policy to be driver of change, as well as this lack of a competitive attitude in addressing this issue. They are exactly what I found during the last week at the occasion of our ENCAT Academy, elements of our discussions. Indeed, I realized during this ENCAT Academy on sustainable cultural management and policy, this paradigm shift between past and present, and this aspect aspects were part of our conversation. And I was really astonished by this wish of participants to learn fast, to be fast in the driver's seat of the change. And this, I think, is very beautiful. So this strong commitment and engagement in learning to immediate change as individual and as part of an organization. This podcast is also an opportunity for us to connect with brilliant mind and organization and learn from their practice. This is why I will be very curious, Claire, to learn from greening best practice in operation from Julie Bicycle. So what Julie Bicycle as leaders in this greening policy is doing to do better operation.
In terms of what we do as an organization, as Julie's Bicycle, we have really a number of key initiatives in terms of our own operations and what we do. And probably one of the most important things is what we do in terms of our money. So we use an ethical bank, and this is Triodos Bank. You know, we very often in the environmental field, you talk about, oh, we need to produce less waste, we need to recycle more waste, we need to use less energy, which is all true. But one of the most important things any organization can do is to look at what it does with its money. Where does it put its money? Where does it get its money from? So in our case, we use the Triodos Bank, which is an ethical bank. And we also use an insurance company called Nature Save, which has very strong green credentials. In terms of sponsorship and the money we get, for example, to fund specific events, we have a very, very clear policy. We must feel that the organizations who provide us with sponsorship and donations, that their values are aligned with us. And, you know, this is something which is a hot topic and a big question in particular for, I think, the arts and culture sector. But thinking about sponsorship and where your money comes from is a really, really big question. And there is, you know, quite a big movement against, for example, fossil fuel sponsorship within the arts and culture sector at the moment. So some of the other things which we do in terms of digital, we host a website using a green hosting service, and they basically have a service which is powered by renewable energy. This is also something that every arts and culture organization can think about. For your website, for example, look at where it's hosted, ask questions of the hosting provider and find out what kind of energy they're using and see what options you have to change that. I would say probably one of our biggest areas of impact pre-COVID was, of course, travel, because we are working not only in the UK, but in Europe and increasingly internationally. The upside of COVID is that we really do the majority of our events and our work online now, which is really good in terms of reducing our travel impact. We do sometimes have to travel, and in some cases internationally. So, for example, we've been very involved in the COP talks over the last few years, and this has involved quite traveling some long distances. This is challenging, and while we do look at options for traveling in a lower carbon way, sometimes it's simply not possible. But we make that decision to travel if we feel that the overall purpose of our travel positive benefit of our travel will outweigh the negative environmental impact which is associated with it. So, yeah, I think the other kind of key things that we are doing in terms of our procurement choices, in terms of the kind of supplies we use, we do an awful lot of work for the events which we organize, the in-person events, in terms of which venues we choose in terms of the catering which is provided, in terms of providing information to attendees about what they can do, how they can travel there, etc. So yeah, they're probably the key areas that we look at as an organization. But overall, what we do to support environmental and climate action across the sector, this is our biggest impact, and this is without a shadow of a doubt a positive impact. So I think combined, we know we have strong environmental values and we put them into practice across all of our decision making as an organization and business. But at the heart, our purpose is about positive environmental change.
Fantastic. So many ideas and so many activities that you already put in place to be responsible. I think it's very important as an individual and as an organization that what you claim you also practice. And I can recognize that this is happening in Julie Bicycle. So congratulations for all these very positive steps that already you are practicing. I'm also curious to understand how you measure the success of your green initiative. So do you have evaluation measure? So is this something that is already also in place in Julie Bicycle?
Oh, that's a really good question. We do this in different ways, and overall, we do this on a program basis. So we have a number of individual programs which we are able to determine the positive impact which those programs have. So one example is we work with the Arts Council England, and we have been their partner for their environmental program for the last 10 years. And what we do every year is an annual report which pulls together information on what change looks like across Arts Council England funded organisations. So we are able to look at, what environmental impact the sector is having, where it's focusing in terms of environmental action, to what extent arts organisations are addressing environmental themes in programming and in creative work, creative responses. So through that program, we're able to really look at change and progress across a number of key areas. And that is through both quantitative data on organizational impacts and qualitative data. And, some things are simply quite difficult to put in neat numbers like a carbon dioxide metric. But, we tell the story of change also through case studies and examples, and simply, understanding what the key trends are across organizations. So that is one example. We have another program which has been running for a few years, which is a creative climate leadership program. This is really very much about empowering individuals within the sectors to take on these issues and to act as an agent for change in their area of work. And for that program, we have a certain level of evaluation. We know how many people have been part of that program, but crucially, we also have a network of alumni from that leadership program, and we are able to see the kind of leadership that those individuals have been undertaking, the projects and initiatives which they initiate and which they are leading on. And we see, this growing community of alumni from that program who are connecting with each other, who are exchanging with each other, but who are really driving change more broadly. So yeah, as I say, it's not always easy to put things into neat little metrics, and we do look at the impact of what we do in both a quantitative and a qualitative way. But in many cases, what we try to do is tell that story of change and progress.
Thank you. This is already a lot. As you say, the quantitative and qualitative evaluation it's very important. And I like also the mention of monitoring how your leadership program impact the leadership of future cultural actors. So this, I believe that if you manage to evaluate the progress on this, it's already very important achievement because they will be the one that will create a change in the sector, the change makers of the future. You have mentioned these programs, and this make me thinking about our wonderful partnership. ENCAT started in 2013 with Julie Basicol, a cooperation of awareness raising for our cultural management and policy community. Since 2013, we publish regularly on our newsletter and magazine example of activities, projects that you inspire to the sector. Could you please tell me more about what Julie Balico does for the sector in terms of programs? One is these creative leaderships, but I know you have much more, but also to help organizations to become responsible or more confident in their greening education.
So, in terms of how we work with organizations, I think our key program is our Creative Green program. This is a program for individual projects and partnership working with different types of organization to support change. And at the heart of it, what we do is we help organizations or groups of organizations or policymakers and funding bodies. We help them to understand what are the key environmental issues for them, given who they are, what they do, who they do it with, and where they are. So we start from the beginning and looking at that broader picture and then identifying what should we be prioritizing in terms of our response and our action, and to develop an approach of commitments and plans and objectives and targets to around the kind of change that they want to achieve. So in many cases, it really is about supporting organizational change. It's like looking overall at what an organization does, what are the issues, and what does it need to really embed change. And that sounds maybe very general, but I think it's important sometimes to have that moment of stepping back before you just go, oh, look, I know I use a lot of paper, so I can do something about it. It's that moment of really going, now, what is the most impactful thing I can do? Where do I have the biggest negative environmental impact? Where can I have the biggest positive environmental impacts? And that will be very different depending on whether you are talking about a theatre or a big music festival or a community-based arts organization or a touring organization or a cultural funding body. So really it's about building that understanding. We very often help organizations to quantify their environmental impacts and to use that information to identify priorities also, and then helping to develop commitments and plans. And our approach really is very much about trying to connect environmental action to the heart of what an organization does, instead of having something which is seen as very separate. And a key part of how we work with organizations in this way is about engaging individuals within an organization and helping them to understand issues, to see how they're relevant to their area of responsibility. We very often do internal opinion surveys to find out what people think. And I have to say, across nearly all the organizations we have done with that, the message is always very clear. People want to do more, people are concerned, and they see the opportunities in taking action. And what is, I think, a key part of the change is having an understanding on the most senior level, especially for a bigger organization, of the value of taking action and of what is required, and taking it really seriously and putting the resource in place. In the past, it's something which has been added into people's jobs, and just like you just do that on top of everything else that you're doing. What we are seeing now is a lot more organizations putting dedicated resource to this, which is really wonderful. And I think what we're also seeing now is a lot more engagement on the senior level of organizations. In the past, maybe we were dealing more with, individual champions or people who are like, yeah, we need to do something. But increasingly, we are having the opportunity to engage with the senior level of an organization. And that is, again, another positive change. So ultimately, the way that we support change with organizations is about building understanding, helping to develop commitment and action, and really, engaging with people and trying to connect that to the heart of what an organization does.
Absolutely. I can recognize even our own evolution. Listening to you, I can see how we moved from an individual sensibility to write our first policy, green policy in 2011, and now this year devoted a resource and put in place a position of a green policy person helping us in doing much more. So I really recognize this changing, and I see other networks taking the same initiative. So moving from individual person to sensibilize the governance and funding the resource to put in place the ambition. And I found this fantastic because without this, it will be impossible without a resource to move to the next steps, that it's really consolidate the organization as a green and positive, in its green and positive impact. Before closing this extremely inspiring conversation that I believe can continue hours and hours, we have so many things to exchange, and I'm asking, learning, I'm sure will be the same for all our audience. I would like the last question to ask, but what still you can do, because you're already presenting us so many initiatives and so many activities. Are new things that are you planning in the future, or you consider that you are now in a phase where you want more to consolidate rather than start new challenges?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think we are very excited at the moment about this opportunity to look at culture-led change. So we are at a place where we've got the science, we've got some of the policy, we've got some of the technologies and investments, but what we really need is for a change in our values and a cultural shift and a cultural change in how we understand what's happening and in how we respond to what's happening. And culture is where it's at. If we can have culture really playing a key role in leading change, this is really exciting. We've always known it at Julie's Bicycle, but I think we've seen in particular over the last few years, policymakers in particular understanding what culture can bring to how we respond to the climate and ecological crisis. And there is increasing opportunities and funding for the arts and culture in this area. And I think this is one of our kind of key areas going forward, is really advocating for and demonstrating what culture-led change looks like in response to the climate and nature crisis. I hope that makes sense. It's at the heart of it now, even like at the COP talks and negotiations last year. For the first time, there was really, really an understanding of why culture and heritage has to be at the heart of what we do next. And this is, I think, one of the key areas for us going forward, advocating and demonstrating culture-led change and having this recognized and reflected on a policy level internationally and nationally. And I think the other key area, which we have developed a lot over the last few years, is around climate justice. And this is an area which we are really working now to put that climate justice lens across everything more strongly through our work across all of our different programs.
Thank you, Claire. So many hope, many perspectives from these future perspectives that you have presented. But as you said, there is no doubt, no question anymore that culture and cultural heritage must be at the core of this future environmental change. And I'm very proud that with NCAT we are all committed to inspire. These podcasts are an example to give the example, to embark in any initiative that can give this support in the climate change for the cultural sector. I really thank you extremely from the deep of my heart for this nice conversation and for sharing your views with the NCAT community. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Genelia.
You have been listening to the podcast of INCACT, the European Network on Cultural Management and Policy. To learn more about us, our activities, and how to become a member, visit incact.org.